Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Welcome to the Master Your Merger podcast. Today's guest is Anirvan Sen, an internationally recognized business strategist and the founder of Fifth Chrome. With over 25 years of global leadership experience, Anirvan has held executive roles across industries and geographies, guiding companies through complex mergers and acquisitions, transformations, integrations, and growth initiatives. Before launching his advisory work, Anirvan led large-scale programs at multinational firms, building a deep understanding of both the strategic and operational levers that drive business success. He's the creator of the Promise Framework, a practical, people-first model for unlocking performance. Whether you're navigating M&A, scaling a business, or rethinking how your organization delivers value. He's also the voice behind the popular Strategic Microdose series, where he shares crisp, actionable insights for modern leaders facing complex challenges. Anirvan, welcome to the show.
My pleasure, Clint. And absolutely, like always, it's going to be a blast, you and I having conversation.
Absolutely. And I do have to say, I've been subscribing to your microdoses, and several of them have come at just the right time to shape how I'm thinking about an interaction during the day. I'll give a little plug there for folks that haven't signed up. They're really useful and kind of reminds me of those calendars that I used to have at my desk where you get a tip of the day.
Thank you. And that's exactly the purpose of the microdose. Essentially, just have a couple of lines to remind you of certain challenges, certain ways that we approach things. And you don't need an encyclopedia. You just need one of those trigger points, the prompts, and that's it.
That's super effective. Well, before we go down that path into just some of the great wisdom that you share with folks through your frameworks, through your advisory work, let's start with your story. How did your career path lead you into M&A and transformation work?
Oh, that's a long time back. Essentially, this was back in the 90s when I joined General Electric. I remember the moment a first week was up, we were told, this was a capital business, we were told that our company has acquired another company similar size and that there's going to be, we didn't call it integration, but there's going to be a merger of sorts. And that was baptism by fire. We didn't have many processes, structured approaches. We just had few good people, experienced people who sat down together and started preparing checklists, etc. So that's where it started, baptism by fire. And over the years, thankfully, with being with General Electric for a number of years, helped me stay very close in terms of operations strategy, lots of M&A, but also divestments. That was a very good learning ground. Some of you who have worked with General Electric, and this is Jack Welch's list, followed by Jeff, there was a strong emphasis on process orientation. Everything needed to be documented, structured, and a process needed to be followed. It's the Lean Six Sigma days. Back then in the 90s, it was still Six Sigma days. So strong emphasis that kind of created a solid foundation. In fact, much of the learning I got for buy and build, which we're going to talk in the program later today, the foundations of those got laid down in my early years at GE.
What a great proving ground. I've worked with quite a few folks that have been at GE, and I myself spent time at Boeing, which was heavily influenced by the GE culture. So I can vouch for the Lean Six Sigma approach. You mentioned the buy and build strategy. So why don't we talk about that? What is buy and build, and how is it different than other M&A approaches?
Sure. The normal M&A approach tends to be sequential in many cases. We're living in the tech world where there are a lot of buys that are taking place, but a lot of companies started their M&A journeys with single transactions. Then they would acquire the company, integrate the company before they would think of buying another company. So everything happened in sequence. Then came the concept of serial acquisition, where people would not wait another 2 years, 3 years before they bought another company, but they were literally back to back started buying companies. And then fast forward to the last 10 odd years, 10, 15 years, what we find is companies are going out and buying companies left, right, and center. Quite often you've bought 2 or 3 or 4 companies at the same time, or within the same time frame, and you want to integrate them. The reason I say you want to integrate them rather than you have integrated them, because I still come across very seldom good stories where companies have bought several other companies and have been able to effectively integrate them. They may have acquired these companies, but that's where the struggle is. The reason why we started looking at the buy and build is we found lots of companies are being bought, acquired within a very short space of time without necessarily enough thought being given on how to integrate. So that's where the buy and build thinking comes in from our perspective.
Got it. So when I think about this with some of the folks that I know, I think about like a private equity that goes in and buys a bunch of plumber, and they sort of operate independently. And then at some point you've got 10 different payrolls, 10 different benefit systems, 10 different management systems. So is that the type of thing that you're thinking about when you talk buy and build?
That's a great point. And in fact, that defies the very logic of why you bought the companies at the first place. Now, I can absolutely understand if you're the private equity version one, where you went did the assets. Private equity version one was all about buying assets. The private equity version two was getting some operational efficiencies in, which was more to do with financial engineering, etc. You did cost synergies, lots of them trying to get them together. But when we start looking at version two of, I'm calling it version two of private equity, it could be version three. But the reality is that by having 10 different versions of payroll, 10 different versions of culture, 10 different versions of sales and marketing, 10 different versions of finance is a recipe for disaster. At the amount of overhead that you create on building this. And that's where the whole logic of buying a company and not integrating it just defies me. Now, I know why certain companies do that, or certain private equity backed companies do that, because they're looking at valuation. They're looking at some rudimentary operational efficiency. They're trying to consolidate so that they can create a size where they can get increased X's, multiples. But the reality is that they're leaving so much on the table with the buy and build. So the model that we promote is going beyond these financial engineering and look at the core operation saying, why do I need a separate payroll? The payroll has to be one. When you're buying multiple companies, it does not make sense to have 4 or 5. Create a solid core payroll and then keep sort of bringing them or tucking them in. The same way when it comes to financials. Why do you need to maintain so many different sets of books when you can bring them in? I'm not saying you completely get rid of all your legal entities. There will be reasons to keep them. But why can't we have one managed set of books, as in plural, but under one sort of system? It could be SAP, it could be Oracle, or whatever it is. The same way we look at some other aspects. In fact, we have come up with a concept called Combine, and we call it the core of an operating model for a buy and build. Combine stands for 7. It's a mnemonics, as I'm a big guy on mnemonics. It's an acronym that stands for one culture, one organizational structure and leadership, one management system, which is the set of KPIs, performance measures, etc., one branding and marketing, one information system, one numbers and financials, and one experience, right? Now, think of it like every time you acquire a company, you bring them in, they also get merged into your combined thinking. And all of a sudden, you start growing, you start scaling much easier because you don't have to worry about, hey, what do I do with the payroll system? The answer is simple. You bring it to the central combined core. What do I do with the financial system? You bring it to the combined core. What do you do with the branding? And that's an interesting thing. And I've written articles which you have read as well. It's like in majority of the cases, if you're a small company, your brand is very close to your heart, but it's not necessarily something that's universally recognized. In fact, there comes a period of time when we really look at, does the company branding make sense to be retained, or do we just retain a product branding and take away the branding of the company? Having that allows you to scale up, rapid scale up, and which is why you can do 5, 10, 15, whatever number of acquisitions that you want in a buy and build. It becomes a lot easier.
That makes sense. The build part really is you're building on that solid foundation.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, when we came up with this model towards the beginning of last year, we started socializing it. And one of the questions that kept coming back was the branding, that kept coming back was the system, IT system. I said, IT systems are tough ones, not because they should not be integrated, but because they take some heavy lifting. The moment you have multiple IT systems, you have multiple versions of the truth. You can't have that as a leadership team of the organization where you're still second guessing how much revenue did I make, or how many customers do I have, or should I be using this CRM or this information about the customers, etc. The worst part is when companies look from the outside, when people look from the outside, they're confused as well. They're like, is this company now acquired by the other company? What's going on? That confusion can absolutely be avoided if you have upfront thinking around this core operating model.
Tell me, what does a successful buy and build journey look like over time?
So interestingly, we've been speaking to lots of private equities and operating partners and some of the people who have done it well. I also looked at examples that GE pursued and some of the other companies pursued. Now, when I'm talking about GE, I'm really talking about a couple of decades back. I saw how they had that core GE way of doing things, and everybody needed to bolt on to the GE way. And that allowed the company to be able to rapidly scale, rapidly expand into new market, rapidly diversify. And now looks like that is what I see when I talk about buy and build, because we've been advising a company, they are still in their just less than 20 million. And with the number of acquisitions that we have planned for them in the next couple of years, it's going to be not very difficult to be able to get to half a valuation within the next few years. The logic is very simple. If you look at the mathematics, when you start moving from, say, the 5, the 10 millions, start getting into the 80, the 100 million, the valuation of the multiples of the EBITDA also increases. So you may be at a 2 or 3 or 4, and you start going into 8 or 7 or 10 or even higher. The second thing is when you start bringing in operational efficiencies, it becomes a lot easier. You start getting some meaty cost synergies in place. Not only that, your ability of getting leverage from the market, the banks open up their ability, their loans, they would give you credit facilities, there's credit facilities that you can go out and acquire other companies. Not just that, if you look at the way you generate your revenue, you can combine forces, you can do a lot more cross-selling, a lot more upselling. And also by bringing companies together, you can also think of new ways of solutions, right? So again, those start adding to the multiples, and which is why all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I wasn't thinking about this. This is abundant thinking, buy and build, and I should be able to get easily to $500 million, if not $1 billion. For some people who are hovering around 20 million, maybe may seem like a tall order, but when you actually think of it logically with the proper buy and build thinking, it's not very difficult to get.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm having a couple of thoughts. I know several people in our audience have been part of private equity teams that have done exactly this kind of strategy. And one of the folks that I've had a chance to talk with after one of our conferences did something like 25 deals in 1 year using a buy and build strategy, and shared some of the challenges because they didn't integrate the way that you were talking about. And so that keeps running through my mind as a way to not get that value. But with what you're talking about, doing it in a way that truly leverages that common core, it just sounds like it would make an enormous difference for a CEO that's out there. And they're using this strategy that is rapid growth, that is unprecedented in a lot of ways. How does that CEO's role change as they scale their business through this sort of buy and build approach?
That's a great question. I'll answer it in a couple of parts. Number one is rapid growth. With rapid growth, we need to keep in mind the following. Number one is a lot of times if you've got a private equity, which is a smaller private equity that has come in, and if you're, let's say, at a 10 or 15 or $20 million size company and private equity is invested, that private equity may not be the right partner for you to scale to like 200, 300 million, because it goes beyond their portfolio. It goes into that because they're in the growth capital mode. They can only give you so much. The private equities don't have the right intent in place. I'm just saying the way they operate is slightly different from the way that mid-sized private equities operate. So I'm talking about $500 million and above portfolio size private equities, because they can actually help you go with your exponential flow. Because unlike in VCs where they allow you exponential growth, private equities would not necessarily look at exponential growth in all cases. Not all of them may have the right kind of expertise. So that's something you need to keep in mind. This journey is not for everybody. For the CEOs, I'm writing this, I probably will come up with an article on this. CEOs go through their own evolution, their own stages, right? So you are an entrepreneur that you started out with, then you became a business owner. Then you became a scale-up CEO. Then you became a corporate CEO. And I'll just add some numbers here. Entrepreneurs is up to 5 billion. Then the business owner is up to 10, maybe 15 million. The scale-up is between that number and maybe 50, 60 million. And then you get the corporate CEO who gets into that 80 million up to, let's say, 200 million. Then you get what we call enterprise CEO, which takes you to a billion, billion and a half. And then you have what we call a conglomerate CEO. And I've given the words along with it, which will make it easier for people who have been in the industry to be able to associate. Say, hey, I actually understand that guy is a CEO, but that guy is a conglomerate CEO. That person is more like a corporate CEO because she is looking at an 80, 100 million, 150 million company versus the other guy was looking at a $3 billion company, right? So the CEO evolution is there. Does an entrepreneur want to be a corporate CEO? Does an entrepreneur who took pride in being in jeans and in Skechers and in informal ways of and being in suits and ties and all of that stuff, which is the requirement of the corporate CEO, right? And that's why I say majority of the CEOs, whether they like it or not, are made to exit a rapid growth private equity within the first 2 to 3 years because they are not able to evolve themselves. And there's nothing wrong in it because I've seen so many entrepreneurial CEOs, they struggle with that corporate structure. And then I've seen others who have been extremely successful. They're like, you know what? I'm finally done with the entrepreneurial hustle. Now I can have a more structured approach. I can actually focus on strategic stuff and help the company grow. So that's the journey. I've seen a few people make it happen. They started out literally at the grassroots level, not necessarily at an entrepreneurial level, but more like at a business leader level. But they came from managing other companies. They came from a vintage what good or what the big thing looks like, pull themselves down, bring it to another level, and then take them up. I've very seldom seen companies that it started out as a CEO of who's an entrepreneur, business owner, and been able to go up. Now, obviously, people will talk about Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Yes, there are people like that, but those are very few in number.
Well, and it's different skills. I mean,
100%.
When I think about that, it's different skills, different desires, different wants. I definitely understand some folks are entrepreneurs because of the lifestyle. The 4-hour work week was so popular for a while. If you're a conglomerate CEO, I think the 4-hour work week is probably not a realistic aspiration.
Absolutely. I find it disappointing when entrepreneurial CEOs want the private equities to come in. And I keep telling her, I say, listen, XYZ, please do not go after private equity money blindly. Keep in mind that they'll come in, they will put in their fiscal discipline, which may not necessarily work for you. And I've seen so many founders struggle. They have to give away their business that they've held so closely to their heart. They've developed it like their own child, and then they are being kicked out of their house. You use the house analogy quite a lot. You build the house from scratch, and then other guys come in and kick you out. That's the last thing you want to happen to the CEOs. With my whole buy and build approach, we go through a priming exercise. We tell them, you have to tell me the reason why you want to continue beyond the 2 years or the 3 years in the new journey, because you're an entrepreneur. You are a business owner and you love doing this, right? And I keep asking them, keep probing them again. And I take the default position that you should not be in this thing for more than 2 or 3 years. And they're shocked. And then I explain the logic. And then Anirvan, you're right. Maybe we'll just stay with them. We go through the first few years. And if we like it, then you can evolve yourself. But if you don't, then you should look at 2 or 3 years. You paid your money. You've done your earn out. You go and build another company from scratch. So that's the education. That's the setting the right expectation is very important in buy and build. And the reality is in buy and build, it's ruthless. Why? Because you're bringing in so many companies together. You want to make sure that success happens, because if it does not, then you're ruining so many people's lives, so many companies. It's not worth it.
Yeah. It's definitely something that needs to be done well. What are some of the common challenges that these founder CEOs face as they're doing these buy and builds?
But the first one is they don't like their wings to be curtailed. They want their freedom of thinking of unreal approaches. They want their freedom to be able to go and money on the things that they want to. And again, I'm not talking about lavish spending. I'm talking about even some of the normal spendings, But when it comes to the private equities, you need to have a certain discipline in place, certain financial discipline in place, which is good in a way, because when you start scaling, every penny should be accounted for, right? So that's one thing I've seen people struggle with. The second thing is the structure and the processes. In many cases, they have not necessarily seen how good processes look, so they don't understand the nitty-gritty details. You and I come from a large company background. So when we talk about operating rigor, we know immediately what we're talking about. We're talking about Monday morning huddles. We're talking about team meetings, this and that. For CEOs, for them to visualize that there are different meetings required, there are certain meetings which are deeper dives, certain meetings which are just light touches, they're not being able to understand and, more importantly, internalize what that means. So that struggle to go into structure is something that I've seen. The third thing, of course, delegation and accountability. Many of the CEOs are still used to making most of the decisions on their own, all the way to hiring people, what payroll to choose, what software to choose. Some of the decisions would stay with them, but some of the decisions would need to be delegated. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing I would say is strategic thinking. The entrepreneurs are thinking, either they're thinking what's going to happen in the next quarter, maybe in the next 6 months, or they're lofty thinking that I'm going to be the next Bill Gates, or I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs. And they have this starry-eyed look into the future, but they don't necessarily have that 2 to 3 years of future visualization saying, this is how big I want my company to be. This is how many people I want, the products, the geographies, etc. And that's where I've seen they struggle. But most important, and one that I defined, is their ability to delegate sales. The sales is still held so strongly by the CEOs. And the reason why they find it difficult is because they have not functionalized the sales processes. They have not structured the CRMs and all of that stuff. But more important, the CEO has a belief that the way they have sold their products in the past is the only way. That's where to get a new sales guy or sales guys and girls in place to be able to do that. That's one thing that I've found extremely difficult for them to give up. So they're ready to give up the finance management. They're ready to give up the HR management. But when it comes to sales, that's the one they want to hold very closely.
And it makes sense from a basic survival perspective too, right? If I'm out selling, I know that I can bring in the revenue that feeds my family.
Correct.
And that's got to be, just as you scale, that's such a big mindset shift.
Yeah.
Do you have a story of a founder who navigated that shift well, or maybe one who struggled more than others, just to help us?
I've seen a few of them in my lifetime. Some of them I had just observed. Some of them I've not necessarily seen directly, but known about them. So yes, there are people from my days at GE that I've seen who have been able to scale up like that. One thing that was common amongst them was that they knew what the end destination would look like. So they would know that a $500 million company, how would they look like? Even though they started again at 20 million or 15 million or 10 million, they knew where they needed to reach. So those are the people that I would say have been successful and been able to traverse the journey well. The other person that I hold deep respect to would definitely be Adam Kofi. He's written a couple of books. He's a great guy. I've spoken to him a couple of times. He's also an ex-GE, although our paths never crossed during our days at GE. But the way he has gone about explaining in his books also absolutely makes sense on the buy and build. That's kind of the inspiration. The other guys that I've seen where I've taken some of my inspiration would be people who've worked very closely with J. Abraham. There's a guy called Ryan Dias. So they talk about in their scalability and how they approach their scalability. In the book that they have jointly written, J. Abraham and Ryan Dias, they mention about different stages of CEOs, and they've taken some examples as well. But in general, I've seen, at least in my opinion, two kinds that are able to get to the sort of to the rainbow. One are people who have come from a rainbow-like situation from the past, and the second one are operating partners. So they are people who are usually put in by the PE to be able to scale the companies, come with that scaling mindset. They know that this is what is required of the company. Outside of that, I would say majority of the CEOs fail to make it happen. And not necessarily that's a bad thing, but just the fact that they've failed to make it happen to them.
That makes complete sense. I've actually recommended Adam Coffey's books to some of my friends that have started doing HR work in PEs. So We'll link that in the show notes and the other book that you mentioned. Well, we're almost at time, so I would love to do a rapid fire round with you on some of the elements of your combined. Does that sound fun?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
so you talked about a single operating model. Why is the operating model important in buy and build? And what are some of the signs of success and some of the signs that maybe it's not going so well?
Yeah, an operating model, the best way to describe it is the way a business is run, right? We're not talking about the revenue generation, the customer focus. We're talking about the internal part, right? And this is where the 7 elements, one culture, one organizational leadership, hierarchy structure, one management system, which is your KPIs, your performance indicators, your policies and procedures, one branding and marketing, one information system, one numbers and financials, and one experience. It's easy to understand that when you have only one version of it, everybody speaking the same language, everybody has the same culture, and therefore it becomes scalable. Everybody who takes on that combined approach operating model can easily scale rather than thinking about what do I do with 3 different IT systems, 4 different brands, etc. So that is what I would say is the nutshell of an operating model.
Got it. So you mentioned earlier that brand is one of those things that is really tricky. What are some of the principles for managing acquired brands and making your choice to keep a brand, change a brand, do something different with it?
Great question. When it comes to brands, typically 2 things, company brand and a product brand. If there is attraction of your product brand in the market, you may want to continue with that, right? So, and we've seen this with other companies, including some large ones where they have kept the product branding intact. When it comes to company branding, especially in SMEs, the brands only matter to the owners and maybe some of their friends. I run a company called Fifth Chrome, and I know the way Fifth Chrome appeals to me. I've got so many emotional stories attached to it, but it's probably not going to appeal to majority of the other people in the world, right? So that's where to just hold on to that brand for another few years, especially when the company gets acquired by another company. Does it really make sense? Am I adding more complexity or versus am I adding more flexibility? If I'm not adding more flexibility, if I'm not adding more scalability, then what's the purpose? Now, there are certain times when you want to maintain certain brand, right? Especially if you have a celebrity endorsement, even though you may be a small brand, if you have a celebrity endorsement, you may want to keep that going. If there is a political reason, if there is a geographical reason, if there is something that it gives it a reason for existence. Some companies are like, we are the only company in Monaco that does M&A integration. Because you're the only company in Monaco, maybe you want to keep that brand in Monaco. So that's the kind of thing that you want to keep in place. Otherwise, in general, brands of the companies should be diluted, should be merged with the parent company in order to reduce variation.
So as we approach the end here, you've just given so many great nuggets of wisdom. If you could only give 1 or 2 pieces of advice to a deal team that's getting ready to start on this buy and build journey, or maybe they've already started, but they haven't quite figured out what to do with it, what are those top 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you'd give them?
Yeah, I mean, the number one is you should absolutely have a firm understanding of what core operating model is going to be. Don't get to buy the glamour and glitz of the valuation and all of that stuff. Those are great dopamine hits, but without the operating model, without the thinking around the operating model, it would be extremely difficult. The second thing is the world has changed. We are no longer looking at physical assets as the way to generate competitive advantage. More and more companies are looking at people, and the way you want people to work is they need to sing from the same hymn sheet. They should talk about same cultures. They should talk about same organization structure. All of that stuff. Again, back to the operating model. When everybody has the same operating model, you should be able to do that. It's an exciting journey. In buy and build, you need to go with abundant thinking. I call it geometric thinking. Just don't go with, oh, you know what? I'm like 10 million now. I can be 20 million by end of next year. No, you need to look at, I'm 50 million now. What can I do to get to 1 billion in the next 3 to 5 years? When you start thinking about your approach, your future life, that's when you start really bringing in some abundant thinking that will help you grow. Think outside of the box, and with a strong foundation, strong core for operating model, that will help. This is not a single discipline journey. It's multidisciplinary, right? So you need to know as much of finance as you need to know about HR, as you need to know about technology, as you need to know about people, as you need to know about culture. So these are the things where we're not asking you to have deep expertise about a certain topic. We say you need to have a pie shape rather than a T shape, a pie shape where you have multiple disciplines that you have a good understanding of in order to be successful. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's for people who have abundant thinking. It's geometric thinking. And as I say, cost synergies, you can only do much of cost synergies. Revenue synergies, sky's the limit.
Yeah. Wonderful advice. And I think as we head into a world where private equity is sitting on so much dry powder and we're hearing about reinvestment funds needing to happen as they lack targets, I can see a world where rather than going for the big fish, a lot of companies are going to be doing more of this buy and build, where they're buying smaller targets that don't provide a big bang by themselves, but provide a series of small bangs that add up. So, Anirvan, thank you so much for sharing this. Where can listeners go to learn more about your work and stay connected?
Yeah, this was absolutely a blast having this conversation. The best way to connect with me, I'm a very active LinkedIn person, so I regularly publish articles, blogs on LinkedIn. I also have YouTube channels. It's called Fifth Chrome Business Insights. I try and put at least one video every week. Fifth Chrome is our website. I'm sure you're going to provide the link. I'm also a prolific content generator, writer. My target is to at least be able to take out 2 books every year going forward.
Wow, that's lofty. Well, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Anirvan, again, thank you so much. And we will put all of those into the show notes so folks will find those links.
Thank you so much. And it was great talking to you, Clint. And I'm sure we just had an absolute brilliant time and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.